Welcome and thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to talk about how you can end self-sabotage, begin to reach deeply for the things that you feel passionate about, and realize that you don't have to continue to be stuck like you sometimes feel with that frustration when you're trying to reach a simple goal. Could be weight loss, could be finding a new way to do things, or perhaps just making life a little bit simpler and happier. On the program today, we're going to be talking about the book, You Can Break Free Fast. That's right, break free. Wouldn't that be nice? 3 simple steps to get unstuck and attract the life you love. On the program today, I'd like to welcome our guest, Ms. Carol Westmore. Carol, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Pleasure, Daniel. It's lovely to connect with you from here in the UK, where I'm currently based.
Yeah, the Island of Wight, as I understand.
Isle of Wight, yes. As in the Beatles song, someone said to me the other day.
Now, I really like your story because, you know, as our program is Beyond 50, we try to actually let people know that sometimes we kind of get stuck in stories, you know, that people tell us particular opinions and ways. And one of those things has to do with aging, you know, that it's almost like an earmark, if you will. That by a particular time, by a particular age, if things just aren't happening, you know, maybe time is running out. But you have a very unique story about just that very thing where, well, it could be one of those times where you could have just kind of given up. But the truth is, that's when things are just beginning.
That's right. In fact, as I headed for 50 and remained in my 25-year marriage, which I knew was really not the right thing for me, but I felt stuck, which is, here comes my passion for wanting to help break free. I really said to myself, you've left it too late. You're going to be 50, you'll never be able to start over. And I really felt quite down about that and, you know, depressed by the time, you know, when things did start to unravel. And, you know, by the wonderful thing that happened after that, as you know, which became the subject of my book, I began to realize that these could be changed. And by the time I was 57, I'd met the man of my dreams. But in that time, from 50 to 57, I'd also discovered work I loved to do and helping people. Now, I tried to fix my husband for 25 years, but suddenly I realized that seemingly useless side of me, which never seemed to achieve my results, had a life purpose, was my life purpose, to help people change, those who wanted to change. So those were the first 2 things that really came alive, meeting, first of all, finding my life purpose and continuing the work to help people break free, and then secondly, actually meeting the man of my dreams at 57 and marrying him and finding my life, the marriage I'd always dreamed of, happening.
I know, for me, I remember watching a documentary, and it had to do with, it was 5 different women, and it had to do with the fact that they had come from various types of pretty good abundance, if you will. You know, it was one was in real estate, the other one was in the creative arts, and you know, again, it profiled where these women actually were in their lives, and they were past the age of 50, and they were kind of living out of cars, you know, just trying to make things bearable in life kind of work. It wasn't like that they looked desperate. It's sort of like they found a way to make life kind of continue, even though that's where they ended up, was living in the street. But this is such an interesting story because you found a tool, something was given to you, and you changed things. And I think this is what's so inspiring, is that you can really do that starting from where you're at to get to where you want to be. Yes.
Well, you know, the story of my life was that coming from a dysfunctional, you know, alcoholic home, when I got to my 20s and 30s, although I was a successful journalist, I was always looking, there was a kind of underlying depression, and I was always seeking self-help, meditation, therapy. You know, I really didn't stop trying to get to that place of, you know, happiness and joy, where and other, you know, issues I had with really being difficult, finding men difficult, you know, and So when I got to 50, I just really thought, it's never going to happen. I've tried everything, but I'm still a mess. What I called going from mess to success. And it was actually the fire, which at that time I'd done quite a bit of journaling, and I was journaling the nights that I had this big fire, which completely took me to another place of despair. I thought I had troubles then, until then, and now I'd lost my dog in the fire. Divorce loomed now. We had to sell our house. I didn't really have a proper home. I wasn't exactly on the street, but we were renting, and I had to move. And then my husband and I, did split up, and so there was no money really to split up. That's why we stayed together right till the bitter end, so to speak. So yes, getting down basically on my knees and saying, God, help me. I'd rather die than continue like this as a complete failure. At least you've got something for me to do. Now, I always believed that people had a life purpose. I'd read enough books, from people from Anthony Robbins to Louise Hay. They all said, there's healing and hope, but I couldn't find it in the methods they gave. I found some help. So at that moment of deep despair, look, dear God, find me something to do that combines all my talents and interests and helps people and helps me make a living. Or really, I'm not scared to die, let me die. I wasn't like thinking of taking my own life, but it was really a place, a crossroads. There's nothing here that I can see for me to do. Find me something to do and I'll do it. But I can't find it. I can't think what it could be. So that was the pointer for me, was the despair. And do you want me to continue what actually happened?
Well, I would, because what you're actually touching on is really amazing, because there are people out there by the millions, and, they get to a point where they try, and they work, and they try, and they find themselves in such desperation, frustration, where you tend to get to the point where you hear everything there is to hear about, the road less traveled. That they're at this point where they really just keep trying. And they say, well, at the point that you're about to give up, or that you actually do, that's when the miracle happens. And there's this point at the very beginning of your book, and I'd like to read this particular quote because it's so true in such a unique way. And that is, one of the most annoying things about God is that he never just touches you with his magic wand like Glinda the Good and gives you what you want. And I keep remembering this particular movie, and it's called The Walking Dead. It's about a group of 5 Marines that are out on a recon mission back during the Vietnam War, and it's 5 black Marines. And what's really unique about this particular movie is the fact that they show each individual story of how they came to join the Marines, what the circumstances were.
I don't know the movie, but it sounds interesting.
It really is. And one of them is, his nickname is the Preacher. And he keeps saying over and over, God's going to give you what you need, not what you want. He's going to give you what you need. And the fact is, sometimes we just don't realize that what we need is that particular magic wand that we're looking for. We'd rather just have it tapped and have it just come easy to us and just kind of make things easier. When the fact is, that's the point of the frustration that we sometimes seem to reach, that we would just like to kind of get out of our pain a little bit easier than we find ourselves doing.
Yes. Because the other thing, Daniel, it didn't happen to me, but I know it happens to a lot of women in midlife. They have a physical scare like cancer, or, it can come in 2 ways. Or, there are more ways, but I know that for a lot, that wasn't my way, but that was a big fear. And when that hits you, and a lot of people move through that, they also said it was the best thing that ever happened. You know what I'm saying? It can be a really horrible physical scare like ME or cancer or something like that.
Well, no, I agree. In fact, I remember doing a show that was probably, goodness gracious, about 9 years ago, where it was 4 different women, 4 different types of religious practice, 4 different stages of cancer, and they considered in this particular book that was put together, they considered themselves to be cancer initiates. That life was initiating them into a different way of being, living, and thinking. And, sometimes for, That's an extreme case, but then there are those like perhaps yours. Here we are, we lost a house, we don't have a job, our husband's on his way out the door, the financial security, it's gone, there's no job, and you think to yourself, how do I keep living? What do I need to do next?
That was my biggest fear, Daniel.
Right.
We are, as I say later, we do seem to have a life purpose. And my life purpose seemed to be to learn to stand on my own feet and not fear being, as you say, a bag lady. It was actually one of my deepest fears was ending up on the street, ending up with nothing. So I had to almost go through it to know that you can survive. Something, I like that saying, I don't know who said it, but buried like a gem in all chaos, pain, and forced change is your life purpose. And Bernie Siegel said every illness holds a message and a meaning. Now, we don't always want to hear that at the time. We fight it. We say, no, poor me. I hate this. As you said, bring me the wand and make it all go away. But sometimes if we will just take that time to believe there's more, that's why I wrote the book. I just wanted to say, don't give up, or, just trust if you can trust in something to take you through this.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's the thing. Just believe. Okay. Now, let's take a look at that particular message because, for instance, when we grow up as children, even Walt Disney was really good about this particular paradigm. Believe that you could be this, this girl that scrubs the fireplace, the floors, the dishes while the wicked stepsisters are out there enjoying the time of their lives, that something better is on the horizon. Just believe. Okay. But for many of us, as much as we want to buy into the paradigm of being Cinderella, being the princess at the ball, that as we try to strive and achieve that particular way of being, of living and wanting, we just get tripped up no matter how much affirmation that we try to have. What is it within us that really prevents us from doing that?
Well, you see, I said to you, just believe, but believe that with these tools that I think are the key, you can break free. I agree with you, just believe and affirm. And what I've found to be true is that from the time in the womb, now, I've been doing this work for about 10 or 11 years. In the beginning, and even since my book, there's continual new ways of investigating how our brains work, how our nervous system works. And, in the past, it just used to be, I used to refer, and in the book I do start to say how Dr. Arman and the brain plasticity, they're people who can actually explain what's happening. And one of the most, what I want to tell you is that this goes back to the womb. One of the most dramatic DVDs I've seen recently is one from Bruce Lipton, the cellular biologist, who's given a lot of input into the way I do my work and others like me. And there's a little baby in the womb, and when the parent starts shouting, the camera can pick it up, going, you can see the shock as it jumps. And so what we're saying is your life now is a printout of these experiences, your beliefs, like life is difficult, life is dangerous, and as much as 95% or more of these were imprinted from the time in the womb through birth during the first 6 years of life. Now, that is the key of my work. Find those imprints. Of course, later in life, you have other traumas. And the other side of this is these are kind of traumatic ways of responding to life, which we are wired for by the fight, flight, or freeze response. So it's in our neurology. I mean, it's part of, in the wild, animals will freeze if there's danger. So what I'm saying is it's there, but we've never really understood how that can be controlling and damaging and causing us ill health and unhappiness and lack of our dreams. Now, as adults, we've never really put those two things together. And once you connect those dots, that's where it's more than believing. It's actually experiencing. You don't have to actually believe sometimes with, people say, look, show me how it works. I can't believe it can work. But when you start to just work with them, using these tools, they will have that breakthrough, whether they believe it or not.
What's really exciting about your book, You Can Break Free Fast, is the fact that you talk about people that we've actually had on our program, just as you had mentioned, Dr. Bruce Lipton. Biology of belief. It's amazing that you can find yourself in the realms of these people that are really saying, look, Here it is, folks. It's really this simple. Now, it's going to take some work, but it's really this simple. And it takes away the old paradigm of the talk therapy where you go into a place and you find yourself saying, I feel broken, I feel frustrated, there's really something wrong with me. How do I get to where I want to go from where I'm at? And in your book, Break Free Fast, you really talk about how you can get unstuck and how you can actually learn to manage to do this on your own, which is to get tapping into the power of the self-conscious, the subconscious, if you will. Let's talk about the power of that particular magic wand that we each have within each of us.
Yes, well, in the old Chinese medicine acupuncture, they used to talk about the energy flows and the meridians. And there were certain points where they would put needles, not necessarily seemingly unrelated to where your pain was. But what we found, and this was actually discovered 20 years ago by a cognitive psychologist who was trying to help people with their phobias. Not trying. Well, he said himself, he only had, all cognitive psychologists only had a 20% success rate. And Dr. Roger Callahan, he's still alive today, I think he's in his 80s, but he really made this breakthrough because he'd also been, all his life himself suffered from phobias, and when he became, after the war, decided to devote his life to helping others who had phobias, he said in his book, Tapping the Healer Within, that we only have a 20% success rate. And all we're proving is that these people with phobias can take a lot more pain than they ever expected to have to take to try and cure them. And I know. And,
I like the more than they expected to take.
Exactly, because they were doing, aversion therapy and this therapy and that therapy. I mean, he tried them all on this particular woman called Mary, and she just had an aversion to water, which was so chronic that she couldn't drive past the sea. She couldn't bathe her children. She had to, she couldn't go step into a bath. She was a complete water phobic. So she kept coming to him, although he couldn't really help her up to this point, because he at least understood her not as a fellow phobic, but for her phobia. He was trained in phobias. Mm-hmm. And so one day he would sit her by the pool. He was in LA, and he had a swimming pool, which is what we probably call aversion therapy. And said, Mary, what are you feeling as you look at the water? And she said, oh, Dr. Callahan, I've got this knot in my stomach. It's just awful. And he remembered from his reading, because he was widely read, that in acupuncture, the meridian for the stomach is under the eye. So he said, Mary, can I just try something? Completely, inspired. Can I tap under your eye as you speak? Let's tap and talk. And within 7 minutes, a smile came on her face, and he was watching her closely. She jumped up and ran towards the water. And he said, Mary, Mary. She turned and said, Dr. Callahan, I know I can't swim, but it's gone. And she went and she splashed her face. And he's followed her for years. It never came back. Now, in that experience, it was the tapping and the talking. And he didn't really, in his book, or as far as I know, delve into what the root cause was. What it actually, but, in my mind, it was probably something that she perhaps remembered. I don't know in his case. But what happened was, that was the breakthrough. He began to then apply it in quite a complicated way in those days, that was 20 years ago, to all his other phobia patients. And he called the method he was using, he said it's tapping with logarithms. And it was it wasn't really something that you and I would have been able to do on our own. But along came a professional coach and engineer called Gary Craig, who'd studied at Stanford. He took on board all the learning, and he said, what if we just tapped on all the points and didn't keep it specific to specific emotions? Wouldn't we still have a breakthrough? So he took away the work. I think he came to an arrangement, with Dr. Callahan that he would develop it and call it emotional freedom techniques. And he began to get the same results, or amazing results, starting with the Vietnam vets, the people in a home for vets. And he filmed that, and over the years, he gave it free to the world, and that's why a lot of us developed and worked with it. Now, when I discovered it in 2002-03, I was already practiced in another therapy, which called The Journey, which it's sort of NLP and hypnosis, which also helps you go back and find the child within that is blocked or stuck. And I had started with that work, and I didn't think there could be anything more powerful until I, got involved with the EFT promotion in South Africa at the time. and went back to the fire. Now, I thought 5 years before, I've healed that fire. You know, I know what it was about. It got me kick-started in my life. But when I started to just tap rhythmically, there was no kind of agenda in it, and with another partner in the workshop, and talk about that fire, I suddenly found out it was breaking down, and I remember I got the insight, the aha, I call it a break-free aha, that I didn't believe I deserved to own a home because I had somehow been responsible for that fire. And in that moment of recollection, I realized I'd been a gypsy moving from home to home, although I'd always owned homes, but I had not. I told myself, you don't deserve to own it. You killed the dog. It was your fault because, for various reasons, which I won't go into. Mm-hmm. But in that moment of seeing myself, this break-free aha shifts me so powerfully. And then I began to practice it with my clients. I was already established by then doing this other work, as a journey therapist. But the first client who came to me who was late, and I did it with him, he had such a big breakthrough that I thought, my goodness, this is powerful. I began to use it from then on. So I hope I haven't gone on too long, but that was really how it all began for me and for Roger Callahan.
Mm-hmm. Now, Carol, here it is. You take a look at the title, You Can Break Free Fast. And especially here in the United States, we have marketing, and I know it's this way around the world now, but we might as well just blame us for getting all this started in the first place. Everything is fast, everything is quick, everything is easy, so people buy into it. Billions of dollars are spent in the self-help realm. To be able to go and achieve, through these simple 8 secrets of success and this and that and the other. But really, when you start wiping a lot of that through, and just recently, believe me, we've been doing this kind of work on our program for a couple of years now, and I'm like, this really is this simple. I can't believe it's really this simple sometimes. And you've got to trust in that. But the fact is, it's a very direct approach that we're talking about. And you talk about, for instance, as you mentioned, just briefly here earlier in the program, going to those times when we were kids, when we got those blocks in the first place. Now, we go out, we do the affirmations, we buy into this, we go to seminars. I mean, thousands of dollars are spent by people over weekends to go to these people that tell us, you can achieve everything you want. Well, these guys did a lot of work. We're talking about hundreds, even thousands of hours of personal work that these guys have achieved to be able to stand there in front of us to tell us, look, you can go do this. So with a little bit of inspiration, we spend our money and we're determined, but we don't see the change. And you talked about owning several homes now, and you realized there was a deep-seated belief you didn't deserve to own these homes. So with this emotional freedom technique, I know, and the thing is that you're going to break free here. Yeah, go ahead.
No, what were you going to say? Oh, well, I won't go into the homes thing at the moment. That came later, you see, once I didn't have this belief that I can't own a home. Then the result of that was when I did want to manifest a home, then I could. There was nothing unconsciously telling me it's not going to happen. But what I want to, I hear what you're saying. Is this a promise too good to be true that you can break free fast? And what I want to say is, I have this analogy of you will break free from one important memory, and then another, then another, then another. I'm not saying you solve one issue in one session, although sometimes you do. Mm-hmm. What it is like is a tangled garden, and this came to me because I used to do quite a bit of gardening. You look at this mess of a garden, you can't imagine how you're ever going to get through it, and you go to one corner and you clip away. You spend, say, 2 hours clipping away at a corner of the garden, at a bush, and then you stand back and you see this big pile of stuff you've clipped away, and you see a bit of a change, and you feel you can take a breath. And you say, wow, and then if you go back and clip away at some more, eventually you've cleared, and then you can plant and eventually have the beautiful garden you wanted. And I think that is what helps me explain it best to people. You're breaking free fast maybe from one important trigger that you didn't realize was causing, as you will see in all those stories I put there. Now, it may not happen in one session for everyone that they feel that they've solved their depression. But when you have this break-free effect, say in an hour, your energy starts to flow better. You take a breath and you see the world differently. You think, oh my goodness, can that teacher telling me I was a dunce and putting me in the corner, which I never thought was that important, have been affecting my whole life? And, there was that guy, Tim, who was procrastinating. He phoned me after he heard me on the radio. And he's 60, and he wanted to start his own business, having been in the financial insurance, broking for many years. But he said, it's 2 years, and I can't get off the ground. Every day I wake up, I don't get that. It's just, what's holding me back? So I never know, really, when I start with someone. I know that their soul will guide them. And a very important part when I am working with someone, if there's a metaphor, what does it feel like? What color is it? And that way you bypass the thinking mind. And as we tapped and talked, and this was, by the way, on the phone, he came up with a memory. I said, does this remind you of any, I can't remember all the process, but I said, does this remind you of anyone in your life? Thinking, maybe someone, there was a cause, but I never know. And he said, oh, no. He said, yes, I remember something. So I said, well, what? And he kept, you keep tapping because you actually are releasing in the unconscious. You're releasing things just by the slow, rhythmic tapping on the different meridian points, which are in the book and on my website. And anyway, so he said, when I was 10 years old, my father and my older brother were all great at sport, and he wanted to test me on the track, the athletics track. So he took me down with a stopwatch, and he said, right, run, and he timed me. I did my best, obviously. He came up, and he looked up at his father, and his father looked at the stopwatch and turned on his heel and walked away without saying anything. Now, that isn't child abuse. That was just a moment of time when that little boy made a decision. It's not worth entering the race of life. I'll never be like my father. I'll never be like my brother. So why bother to try? And when he could connect that memory with his current trying to get a business going in the race of life, everything changed for him. Plus, he actually came and did some more workshops because he realized that he wanted to help others as well with this work. But it was a big breakthrough. And you see what I mean? We didn't solve every single one of his problems and get his business going in one session. But we cut the cord, or let's say we had the key. We broke the lock on the prison that had kept him there since he was 10, feeling, oh, why bother? I'm never going to make it in the race of life.
Well, and Carol, really what I was trying to do, and I probably did it in a very long way, and you described it beautifully, is when you talk about you can break free fast, is that it's actually faster than you think, okay? One of the stories that came up in the book was about a particular man by the name of Thomas who overcame a fear of intimidation. I personally would like to align myself with that story because I remember there was a period of time back in the day when I would go to work, and I would always have this jolt within my stomach whenever a manager or supervisor, came in the room. It didn't matter, who it was. And there would be that way that I would talk with them, and even though they were being friendly, I felt tremendously on guard, like, inside of me what my thinking was is, I'm running for my life here, so just be careful, okay? Intimidation, big time. And then all of a sudden, some years later, I decided, I'm going to go ahead and try hypnotherapy, for instance. And I said, one of the fears that I have, or at least that he noticed, is that you seem to have a fear of authority. And he really basically said a lot of us, really, that stems from just a fear of dying. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And so we worked on that, and I noticed that as I was around people who were allegedly in charge, or supposed to be in charge, that jolt just wasn't there. That emotional trigger just wasn't there anymore. And that was very freeing for me. And as I had described to somebody, I said, it was amazing because somehow all these ruminating thoughts that I had that would trigger just a barrage of emotional things throughout my body, you'd tense, you'd hold, you'd grit, you'd do all kinds of things, were gone. And I was amazed at how fast that really was. And I started to realize, was it really all that simple to begin with? And so it really is that fast, what you're talking about here. Yes,
yes. Since I wrote this book, I've continued to train in an advanced application of it, which goes more into physical things like allergies. It's called matrix re-imprinting using EFT, which is the core of it. And the reason I'm going to tell you this is because in several cases of people having a phobia that they couldn't explain, it came out that in the one case, a lady, so let's say an allergy to oranges, just she couldn't eat them. She was on the phone eating, well...
Even just saying the name orange would bring up a reaction. It's just amazing.
For you?
No.
Anyway, no, exactly, anyway. No, but her body would respond with, and some of these are actually life-threatening. I'll tell you one about oranges and one about coffee, which is absolutely stunning. But the one about oranges, she was eating oranges on the phone when she got a phone, not on the phone, she was in the middle of eating an orange. She picked up the phone, which rang, and they told her father had died. So that connection had put her body into an allergy to oranges. When she discovered it, obviously, and it sounds amazing, but after that she didn't, the allergy goes. But the most amazing one is in the book, the book Matrix Re-imprinting using EFT, and that is the case of a therapist using EFT and the Matrix Re-imprinting. The lady comes to him. She has got such a life-threatening allergy to coffee that she can't even have it in her work environment. She literally falls on the floor and, I don't know what the word is, but, she excretes from every orifice. And so she has to walk around. She's tried everything for about 4 years as to try and find help. Mm-hmm. And in this one session, she starts by remembering, going back to the one trauma, which was her boyfriend at the time, her partner, who was abusing her, kicking her and on the floor, and she had to work through. That was one trauma. And then when she went to a halfway house, and this is where the trigger was, the women used to sit around drinking coffee and talking about their abuse. And the connection between that painful time in her life and the coffee drinking had caused this extreme aversion to coffee. And at the end of the session, which isn't normal, normally we wouldn't say to the person, well, let's test this out, but she insisted on smelling coffee after that, and it had literally disappeared. Her life-threatening aversion to coffee. So, you see, it can happen. I'm not saying, I don't want to tell people that every single session they're going to have this, but when it happens, it's so amazing that we just are in awe of how the body tries to protect us, you see. Mm-hmm. And so same with our childhood traumas. The body freezes a trauma because we need to survive. And it kind of blocks it off in a bubble of time. And when we go back and release that trauma, and I don't know if you, in your situation, actually remembered perhaps authoritarian people who had made you feel, that I could kill you, someone might have said. I'll kill you next time you do that. It could have just been something like, just something like that. But the body responds to that depending on, especially if you're in we are until the age of 6 in a kind of hypnotic state. Our brains are kind of we're soaking things up, and unexpectedly if someone suddenly pounces on us and says, get out, you're an idiot, or look at this, what you've done, or you're a clumsy klutz, it kind of goes right in as if we had, been hypnotized to believe that. So yes, it's really, really powerfully, healing this work, and I just feel it's such a privilege. I just want people to know you can't force them upon them, but just to know there's this option if they really are stuck.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, Carol, believe me, I'm offering a blessing that it really is fast, and you're right, it doesn't happen right away. But boy, it's amazing when you have these, as you call them, aha moments. Talk about those.
Yes, well, I mentioned the one when I was tapping and I realized, I've put this thought into myself that I can never own a house again. Mm-hmm. But you see, because I was a journalist, people's stories are so interesting to me. And, I couldn't help collecting them and wanting, to use them because I think people also relate to stories. So, you'll have someone who just says, well, men always leave me. And you'll say, well, I could try that. And this was a person who had never heard of my tapping. And she, I met her completely out of context of my work as a therapist. I didn't tell her I was a therapist. And she said, I've just seen my partner with a man, and with another woman, sorry. And I believe, he's going to leave me. And yet we're going away for the weekend. What shall I do? She looks sick, So I said, well, look, let's try and tap and talk. And are you willing to just see what happens? So she did, and of course, when the tears come, it's almost like you unfreeze that frozen block. And a tear came to her eyes, and she said, I said, what's come up for you? Has this, she said, first of all, it was a pattern in her life. She got to a point with relationships, and men always left her. So she was like expecting it almost. And of course, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Sure.
Anyway, she went back to the age of 12, and as the tears came, she said, my father died. And now she came from a very traditional, well, not that it matters, it could be anyone, but in the African culture, there's there's a lot that goes on after for a funeral and a person dying, and and she was kind of she wasn't part of being taken care of in a way. Her the father dying of a heart attack, so she had been left bereft, and for the rest of her life, this kind of feeling that men are always going to leave me. So that was like the aha for her, even though, as I say, she knew nothing about this kind of work, but for her it was powerful. And what I did, which we can go a bit deeper into the process, and that's just in my book, well, I do say you can have a campfire, and you can bring anyone to the campfire, because there is really no time in your memories and in the matrix, what we call the matrix. In the energy field, time is all time. So you can bring a person who's deceased and have a conversation with them and clear and forgive and let go. And know by the end of that session that person has never really left you completely. The love is there. The love doesn't die. And she came out of that session, and it was very interesting because she said, I feel so much better. But of course, you always say, well, the test is what happened next. And what happened next, I said to her, you see, you were always responding from your 12-year-old. When things got emotionally difficult, or you thought someone, the man was at that point, your 12-year-old would actually almost make it happen by her behavior, by her insecurity. Knowing that you can respond as an adult. So she went away, she had a lovely weekend, and I happened to bump into her. This was I think it was 2 months later, and she said, no, I'm still with my, it's absolutely changed. We're still together, and it's all fine. And it was, that's what I call a break for your heart. But then there are times when I think it doesn't see, okay, so that was the one story. Then there have been other people who've come to me who just say things like, I'm a pharmacist, I'm 30, I can't go to cocktail parties and speak, I can't speak up, something freezes me, I just go home every night. And then when we do the work and they talk about something, one of the big traumas of abuse, and they told their mother, perhaps it wasn't so much the abuse as telling the mother, and the mother saying, dismissing it so that you can't speak up for yourself. And I said to myself, I get almost, up on my high horse, why is it fair or right that her life should be blighted by that? Isn't it right that she should be able to break free and have options in her life? Mm-hmm. And that's the part that makes me passionate. Things like that can be blighting, and eventually, by the way, as Bruce Lipton probably said, it can cause ill health. Your health starts to break down. And that, I think, is particularly in midlife, if coming back to the 50-year-olds, when you start to get these, these illnesses like ME, and they start in aches and pains. If you do some of this work, this emotional clearing and energy clearing, it can help you, and I'm not saying it's the only thing you need to do, but it can help the body heal faster, because if it becomes like burdened by all these old traumas. And there's a lot of trauma work done by people like Dr. Scare and Peter Levine, which has now shown how trauma does weigh you down and cause, seemingly what doctors would call, what's that word when you psychosomatic things. They say, well, you shouldn't be, we can't find anything wrong with you. But actually underneath can be old traumas, unspoken of abuse, things that are clogging your nervous system. And of course, that's the big thing. Our cells can't repair and protect us. Bruce Lipton says that. We have in our cellular body, our cells are either repairing all the time, or if there are a lot of traumas, they think they have to protect us all the time, protect us from authority figures, protect us from getting hurt. Life is dangerous. I'm not good enough. Protect us from, So if we have a lot of trauma and old, stuck memories, that are telling our whole system, our cells of our body, to be careful, to beware, to protect all the time, then our body can't get on with repairing. Mm-hmm. So that's where the stuckness can come and lead to ill health.
Now, we talk about, in your book, emotional freedom technique, and what I really like you say here in one of the chapters. It says it's that you are tapping into the power of your mind, which is intention, feelings, which is emotion, and energy, which is your body meridians. Now talk about how emotional freedom technique actually works in its efficiency.
Well, it's quite interesting because even the concept we had 10 years ago is developing, but in the way that we learned it originally with EFT, it seemed to be that these, we had blocked energy meridians from those traumas I was talking about. It was like a block sets up, and sometimes a cluster of things. You know, let's say it's about men. You see your, I'm using this as an example, you see your father beating up your mother, and then he leaves, so you think men are dangerous, and there's always trouble. And so through your life, you've developed a cluster of these almost self-fulfilling prophecies. You expect it, and it happens. Unfortunately, it's the law of attraction in reverse, as we don't want it to work, but that's what happens. We seem to have a pattern. So with the emotional freedom techniques, when you start to unravel these different memories and break free here and then break free there, break free, sometimes you'll start by breaking free from your last trauma. It could be, the last divorce you had, but you will really know that behind that there'll be more, and behind that, and you can almost go down the timeline to your early years. But you don't necessarily in your first session if the person has come to you and they've got a big trauma. So you seem to be, and this is what we understand, and this is how we describe it, tapping into the unconscious, which is holding the trauma, so that you can release the energy block at the same time. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And what I began to see when I developed my formula, because I'd started as more an emotional healer doing the journey, I began to realize it doesn't matter where you start. If you start with the emotions, you free up the energy. If you start with tapping into the energy blocks, you're going to free up the emotions. So I saw that it didn't actually matter where you started, but just for goodness sake, start somewhere. Start with someone, you understand. You know what I mean? If you start somewhere, you can start to clear that garden. You can start to release the body of one trauma after another. And there will be some miraculous stories of how, cancer heals, or, we're not allowed to say that, obviously, but people will come forward and say, this is what I had before, but when I finished working with this, and for some people it'll be one session, for some it'll be a year. Look, with chronic disease like ME, it does take longer usually. Certain memories will come up, but over a period of time, and certain aches and pains can disappear miraculously. But, you have to put into the picture other things. But once you start the healing work, you start to, when you free up some of that energy or emotional blocks, you start to look around and say, hey, maybe there's this diet program, maybe I'm eating too much sugar. And you start to get messages which were blocked before because you were so imprisoned in your where you were. And that's why getting unstuck. I have another analogy, which is that your ship of life is sailing along. And gradually you start to go off course. And this is where, finding your life purpose comes. Because when you're free, you begin to access, more joy, more peace, more power. But let's say you're going along your ship of life, usually in your 20s and 30s, this is how I see it in my life, and you go off course. You're making some wrong decisions, or you're sticking in a job that's not right for you, but you still soldier on. You keep your ship going. Eventually, when you go really off track and you get stuck on a sandbank, which is what would be the crisis that happens, you can't move forward, and you're either going to sink, or you can start to excavate that sandbank. And if you like, the EFT, and perhaps that's not answering your question, but EFT is gradually tapping away at the sand that's keeping you stuck on that sandbank until your ship of life can, be free again to set sail. But you need to do some of that excavation or tapping work, as I see it, to get yourself moving.
Now, why is it that the tapping helps? What is it about the physiology, if you will, that really does that? Because we're talking about tapping on specific meridian parts of the body.
Correct. Well, if you think about why does an acupuncturist get success with putting needles to unblock the energy flow, all we're doing, and I think acupressure as well does it, all we're doing is tapping on that same point, but instead of using a needle, we're using our fingers. Now, the answer is I don't know if anyone has really explained it in more, scientific or medical detail. But that is how I understand it. And of course, I'm not a medical professional as such.
Mm-hmm.
But all I know is that something seems to release when you tap. And sometimes we have a thing called slow tapping, where you just tap and tap until something comes up. You don't even know why you're there in a session. And you'll just tap, and tap. I always use the side of the hand, the karate point as a shorthand. And it just helps. Some people put on music and just tap and see what comes up. Some people make a list of the biggest traumas they've had in their life and go back and tap and release them. I do suggest that someone has one session first with someone who can, really guide them through it. Because, sometimes, and look, I'll be honest, even though I am an experienced trainer and matrix re-imprinting with EFT practitioner, I and many of my fellow therapists or practitioners, we like to go to someone to hold that space, because one of the things we've discovered in recent years is that I won't go into it, but there's a technique called metamedicine which relates to this. And every illness they found in metamedicine, Dr. Hammer found, seems to have before it this traumatic time or a trauma, okay? Now, this trauma is usually unexpected, dramatic, isolating, and you had no resources. They call it by those names. So that is what we would call a trauma. It happened unexpectedly, it was dramatic, isolating, and you were helpless. You had no resources, so you froze usually. Now, I hope I'm not going off track, but basically, somehow the tapping and the talking and the thinking of the thing that seems to be keeping you stuck, either on your own, but preferably with someone, because you were alone and isolated when the trauma happened. And the gift of having someone, even if it's on the phone or in a Skype session or in person, holding the space for you while you do it, is that you're not alone. They're just saying, keep tapping, it's safe, keep tapping, it's okay to locate and let it go. And that is perhaps, although you can do it on your own, that is what I think is happening. You could say you're tapping into the field. As we talk now more with quantum science, there's a field and a metamorphic technique. They talk about the field. Matrix re-imprinting, we talk about the matrix or the field. So, there are different ways of explaining it, and I hope I'm not making it too complicated, but the easiest, the one in a sentence answer is it's unblocking the meridians as acupuncture would.
Well, no, actually, you didn't make it complicated at all, and as you said, as someone who actually does this for other people, you like to go to someone who actually can help you have that space, as you say, and I think a lot of that comes from accepting the fact that we need to just kind of reach out and that we need to feel safe, because probably the traumas that we're trying to tap away, that the phobias that we're trying to clear, come from the fact that those people that we reached out for, and it could be your parents, it could be anybody really, that we held in esteem, were the reasons we became emotionally blocked in the first place. It's not their fault, it's what we became. Now, what I noticed here in the book that you have is you have these tapping points, and there's a total of what I believe is 11, or pretty close to that, and more than half of them are the face. Why is that?
Yes. Well, we do tap under the arm. Well, I don't really know why. Maybe it's just easier and less intrusive if you're working with someone.
I just figured because the face punches so many different ways when we're thinking about things. When you're angry, the face contorts. When we're happy, it changes, it relaxes, and I just figured maybe that's what it was, that we really store most of our triggered emotional responses in the face. I don't know.
Well, it could be, but I think, honestly, the other place is the side of the fingers and the side of the karate point and the wrist. Those are also very good, and also the gamut point, which is on the top of the hand, gets through to a lot of meridians. Those people, like Donna Eden, I think you might have had her on your show, who are, who talk about meridian therapies, can tell you what each one means. But it doesn't, it doesn't always help you to know that, because it gets you back into your mind. And that is exactly how this all started with Dr. Callahan. He tried to figure which emotions were connected to which meridians. But in the end, we found if we just tap on them all and go ahead, we're going to get this. It's going to get to it. So yes, does that answer the question? I mean, like there's one very good place on the heart, which is under the breast, but it means sort of for some, if you're a therapist, it means kind of, if you're going to tap on the person, lifting your left boob and then tapping under there. So we don't always go there, we just rather do the hands and the hair, and the top of the head's also a good one. And it's also easy, there's no threat there, and as you say, it is connected with all the meridians, and you're thinking and talking and tapping and thinking and talking until and the person might just put in a question that you're working with. Does this remind you of anything in your life? Or if this was a color, what color might it be? And sometimes if a person's really stuck, and that's a very important point, you say to them, well, there's a part of you that doesn't want to give up smoking, and that's NLP, and a part of you, let's just don't get so fixed that I am never going to give up smoking or I am a smoker. So sometimes you have to just sort of, if you're working with an experienced therapist who knows NLP and, some of these other techniques, counseling skills, then you get to it, but you never, as I say in my book, you never go head on. Tell me what's the root cause. What happened when you were 17? It's none of that. It's just, let's just tap and talk and see what comes up. Or let's put it on a movie screen. And as you review the movie, in other words, don't ever associate with the memory, let's see what's happening. What's happening to that person in the movie? Let's tap and talk, So it's very kind of, you have to be very gentle, I think, and that's, be that caring, as you say, mother or father who couldn't just take you aside and say, well, what's happening here? Did you get bullied? Let's just, what did the teacher say? I've heard of horrific things that happen at school, like this, and the kids don't go home and tell their parents. This was an extreme in South Africa where the little girl, her memory was of her mouth being taped and tied to the desk,
Wow.
and then sent home later. And, can you imagine that she had issues with expressing herself or, that was a trauma. But you don't go home and say to your mother necessarily, I was a bad girl at school. Mm-hmm. And, and it's just so beautiful. Did you see that there was that one story about Jenny who money seemed to run through her hands? And that you must listen, as a therapist, to the metaphors. Oh, so money always runs through your hands. Okay. And she had no idea why. She said, I get a bonus. And then it's gone. I can't seem to hold on to money. So I actually, in that case, I actually took out a banknote and I put it on her hand. And she literally began to shake and shiver. And she was really upset. So I took the money away and I put it to one side. And I said, well, let's just tap on this. And when she really went back to the memory, it was of being a little girl, and her mother was strict and would often take the strap to her generally. But anyway, while her mother was at work, she had found some coins in her mother's cupboard. But being a very young child, she didn't know what they were. They were just glittery and shiny. And so when her mother came home, she was so excited and showed her mother, and her mother said, beat her with a strap and said, you never to hold other people's money, never touch other people's money.
Oh, wow.
Or never touch money, And she had another memory as well where something else had happened like that. So a part of her, when she got money, was very, was fearful of holding on to it because of that memory. Now it seems amazing, doesn't it? But it actually helped her, and her life changed after that. I did a bit more of a process with her because she had been so programmed with that the tapping helped. And then I actually got her to, I give the story in the book. I said, let's plant a little money seed and let's grow a money tree. And does your little girl feel safe there? And she said yes. And gradually she grew into this big money tree where there was enough for her to share and to have for herself and others. And it kind of took away, eventually, she collapsed that triggering memory, which she wasn't conscious of until we worked slowly through the session. So you see what I mean? It helps to have someone there just to guide you sometimes.
And that's such a great analogy to use, especially about money. I remember a friend of mine many years ago, he says, you really want to find out the things that trigger you, especially when it comes to abundance. He says, when you get the opportunity, find a way to get yourself a $100 bill. In the morning, put that $100 bill in your pocket, and then go out and go about your day. And feel what it's like to have that $100. Now, $100 can actually, it can go a long way, really. It can certainly make us feel pretty good at particular times throughout the day, whether it's getting some food, whatever it is. But he says, but just know that it's there, but then also don't bother thinking that you need to use it. Just feel what it's like to need to use that. And he says it's amazing because $100 gives you a lot of freedom. And he says, but at the same time, pay attention to the urge that it takes for you to want to use it, and the reasons that you have for wanting to use it. And he says, when you feel those things, kind of write those down, and then look into why those came up in the first place. And it's pretty amazing, isn't it? And I can see where you can apply that particular exercise with the emotional freedom technique like you describe in your book, You Can Break Free Fast.
Sorry, what did you say? What was the question?
I was saying it's amazing how you can take that simple exercise and apply it to what you have in your book, You Can Break Free Fast.
Yes, it's fabulous, and the unconscious will, if it feels safe and if it realizes, that part of you, that was one of the points I wanted to make. The part of us that has got stuck was really trying to help us, either from being criticized or, the part of us that keeps us, I can't do this, or I don't know why I can't seem to do it. There is a part of us that is really, it's been set up to help us. And it's because it wanted to, protect us, whether it was a, hardwired brain response of fight, flight, or freeze, or whether it was a part of us that made a decision, I'm not good enough, I'm not going to, try because people will criticize me. That part of us, when we actually go into the session with matrix reimprinting, we find the child, we call it an echo, but the child, sorry, I'm going a bit off the book, but it's an advance of my book. And we say to the child, thank you for holding this all this time, but it's okay, it's safe now to let it go. And it's that kind of attitude to your traumas and to the traumatized parts of you that really gets the results. Because it's safe now, you don't have to hold on to it anymore. And actually in a session now, what we do after we've done the tapping and we've had the aha, we actually then re-imprint a new memory, because in our memories, we are actually remembering corrupted memories. They weren't necessarily like that, the beliefs we set up. And we can re-imprint a positive memory as if it would have happened. And this is where we're getting amazing results, because in one session you're bringing together the releasing of the pain and the trauma and the re-imprinting of a positive memory so that can resonate as it would have been if you'd had the father who loved you and, whatever the trauma was. And this is the exciting part. This work is just amazing now, in the year since I wrote the book, I have developed, with this new approach, the EFT, and I probably will, be writing another book because it's so exciting. But that book stands for people who don't know about EFT, who think it's, I wrote it really what I call simply. It tells a story. It tells my story. It tells these people that I've mentioned, their stories, so that you can dip into it any time and think, yeah, I can relate to that, And you can pick it up at an airport. I really wanted it to be that kind of really easy book for people to grasp how they can break free.
Carol, I was thinking about the racehorse Seabiscuit. Many people have probably seen the movie. And I remember there was actually an American-produced The American Experience about Seabiscuit. And why this horse became so phenomenal was the horse and its jockey were really along in their years and were used to losing. And all of a sudden they came together and they were winners. And it inspired a nation during the Great Depression, probably even the world, we just don't know, but at least America at the time during the Great Depression. I'm down and out of my luck. I'm later along in my years. And if these two can pick themselves up and they can become champions, so can I. And that's exactly what's so inspiring about your story.
I'm getting goosepimples because my daughter, when she was in her 20s, and I reached another, in those 7 years, it wasn't all plain sailing. I reached another dip, and I said to her, I don't know what to do. I need to do this, and I need to leave South Africa and come over to England and work and do, something which I'm not really trained to do, which was caring, I'll be honest. And she said to me, Mom, I believe in you. My daughter loves horses. She said, you might see biscuit. Apparently, she said that. And when I got married and met my husband, there were only 20 people at our wedding, that was one of the things I stood up and I said, Lorraine, thank you for believing in me. You don't have to be my trainer anymore. And they all laughed and I said, I've got a new trainer, my husband. But, but I love that Seabiscuit story. It melts my heart that she believed in me. Everyone else, just didn't know what I was on about, with my life, trying to apply the law of attraction and, I just didn't always get there to the world and even to myself. And when she said Seabiscuit, yes, thank you, Daniel. Thank you for reminding me how beautiful that film is and that story.
You bet. The book is You Can Break Free Fast, and believe me, it'll feel pretty fast once you get those break-free aha moments. Our guest today, Carol Westmore. Carol, thank you for joining us on the Beyond 50 radio program. If you can, for our listeners, is there a website people can find out more about you?
Yes. Oh, thank you, Daniel. It's been such a pleasure. My website is www.breakfreefast.com. BREAKFREEFAST.com.
I was going to say very good, and when it comes to your new book, we'll be excited about bringing you back on the program.
Yes. Thank you, Daniel, and all the best to you and joy on your team. And to all the listeners, thank you for letting me share from my heart.
Thank you very much. Again, the book is You Can Break Free Fast. Our guest today, Ms. Carol Westmore. Thank you again for being on the program.
Bye.
We also encourage you, the listeners, to visit us at our website, which is beyond50radio.com. Sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.